It's #1 on Netflix.
Yeah.
Like, it's been #1 on Netflix. Yeah. So are you coming out? I know next year is going to be a #2. Season 2.
Or I just put it on YouTube.
50, the way you run. This cannot be all that you have. Is there other stuff that you just have not shown?
Stop scrolling. This just changed everything. 50 Cent has now confirmed that Netflix is not done with Diddy, and what's coming in season 2 is being described as far worse than anything we've already seen. This isn't damage control anymore. This looks like a final takedown. Before we go any further, I want to ask you something and answer honestly in the comments. Do you think Netflix protected Diddy in season 1? Or do you believe season 2 is where they finally tell the full truth? Let me know what you think down below. And if you want to stay ahead of every real update, in this case, not rumors, not recycled headlines, make sure you subscribe now, because this story is moving fast. Let's get back to the story. When 50 Cent speaks on Diddy, it's never random. He doesn't tease, he doesn't walk statements back. And most importantly, he doesn't speak without knowing exactly how the industry reacts behind closed doors. That's why his recent confirmation about Netflix finishing Diddy hits differently. This wasn't said as a joke. This wasn't trolling. This was calculated, and the timing matters more than people realize. For months, many viewers felt something was off about Netflix's first season. It raised serious questions, but it stopped short of crossing certain lines. Names were blurred, timelines felt incomplete, certain testimonies were acknowledged but not fully explored. And when season 1 ended, a lot of people walked away thinking the story had lost momentum. That assumption may have been the biggest mistake, because according to 50 Cent, season 1 wasn't the exposure, it was the setup. What makes his confirmation so powerful is not just what he said, but when he said it. This came at a moment when Netflix is under more scrutiny than ever. Viewers are no longer satisfied with surface-level storytelling. Audiences now expect accountability. And Netflix knows that if season 2 fails to go further, their credibility takes a permanent hit. That pressure changes everything. 50 Cent has been warning about Diddy for years, long before documentaries, long before trending hashtags. And every time the public dismissed him, time slowly proved that his statements weren't random shots, they were early signals. That's why when he says season 2 is worse, it doesn't mean louder. It means deeper. It means things that were previously untouchable are now unavoidable. One of the most overlooked details is Netflix's silence. No heavy promotion, no denial, no reassurance. That silence isn't accidental. In media, silence often signals preparation, especially when legal teams are involved, especially when what's coming can't be undone once released. Season 2 isn't being rushed, it's being fortified. Another key factor people are missing is why this didn't happen years ago. Why now? Why not at the height of Diddy's power? The answer is simple but uncomfortable. Influence delays exposure, but it doesn't erase evidence. Over time, alliances weaken, silence breaks, and patterns become impossible to ignore. Season 2 reportedly focuses less on isolated incidents and more on documented behavior across time. That's what changes perception permanently. And this is where 50 Cent's confirmation becomes crucial. He's not reacting as a fan. He's reacting as someone who understands how narratives collapse. He knows that once a second season reframes the story, the public never looks at the first season the same way again. Everything retroactively changes. People close to Diddy are reportedly nervous, not because of rumors, but because of structure. When a platform like Netflix commits to a second season under this level of scrutiny, it means they believe the material can withstand pushback. That's not speculation. That's how risk assessment works in media at this scale. Season 1 asked questions. Season 2 answers them. And when answers arrive, they don't just affect one person. They affect everyone who stayed silent, everyone who benefited, and everyone who dismissed the early warnings. That's why this moment matters. Not because of shock value, but because narratives don't survive when documentation replaces denial. As we move forward in this video, understand this clearly: what's coming isn't about entertainment anymore. It's about exposure. And once exposure reaches this level, control disappears. Diddy doesn't get to frame the story, his team doesn't get to spin it, and the industry doesn't get to ignore it. This is why 50 Cent spoke now. This is why Netflix didn't stop at season 1. And this is why season 2 is being described as worse, not emotionally, but structurally. Because once everything connects, there's no going back. And this is only the beginning. What makes season 2 different isn't just new footage or louder accusations. It's the shift in how the story is told. Season 1 allowed viewers to question, to doubt, to debate intentions. Season 2 reportedly removes that comfort. Instead of asking what might have happened, it focuses on what can be proven, documented, and connected over time. And that distinction is everything. According to people familiar with the production, Season 2 moves away from isolated incidents and instead builds a pattern. Not a moment, not a rumor. A pattern that spans years, locations, and multiple voices that were never connected publicly before. That's why insiders are calling it worse. Because once a pattern is established, denial stops working. This is where Netflix's role becomes impossible to ignore. Platforms don't escalate stories like this unless something fundamental has changed. Season 1 tested the waters. Season 2 commits to the direction. And when a company with Netflix legal exposure commits, it signals confidence in the material. Not confidence in opinion, confidence in evidence. One of the most important changes in Season 2 is perspective. Instead of focusing on Diddy as a powerful individual surrounded by chaos, the narrative reportedly reframes him as a consistent center point. The chaos no longer feels random, it feels organized. And that subtle shift is what alters public perception permanently. People often ask why the industry stayed silent for so long. The answer isn't simple fear, it's dependency. Careers, access, money, protection, all tied to proximity. Season 2 reportedly addresses that ecosystem directly. Not just who did what, but who enabled silence and why. That's when discomfort spreads beyond one name. 50 Cent understands this better than most. He's watched how power protects itself, and he's watched how it collapses. That's why his confidence now feels different from past commentary. He isn't speculating about outcomes. He's reacting to momentum. And momentum, once it shifts, doesn't reverse quietly. Another reason Season 2 is being described as more damaging is timing. Public tolerance has changed. Viewers today demand accountability in ways they didn't before. What might have been dismissed 10 years ago now sparks outrage. Netflix knows this, and they're leaning into it rather than running from it. There's also a legal dimension people aren't fully considering. Documentaries at this level are reviewed extensively, claims are vetted, language is measured. If Season 2 goes further, it's because the production believes those steps can withstand scrutiny. That doesn't mean lawsuits disappear, it means Netflix is prepared for them. What's especially telling is who isn't speaking. Silence from certain industry figures isn't neutral, it's strategic. And viewers are noticing. When people who once defended Diddy stop responding altogether, it sends a message stronger than denial ever could. Season 2 reportedly introduces testimonies that were previously considered too risky to air. Not because they lack credibility, but because the environment wasn't ready. Now it is. That readiness changes everything. Context matters. Timing matters. And Season 2 arrives at a moment when the public is finally willing to listen without dismissing the voices involved. This is why the phrase Netflix is finishing Diddy keeps resurfacing. Not because one documentary ends a life or career overnight, but because it removes the last layer of plausible deniability. Once that's gone, recovery becomes nearly impossible. Public memory hardens. Narratives lock in. Another overlooked element is how Season 2 reframes past defenses. Statements that once sounded reasonable now feel hollow when placed alongside new information. This retroactive effect is powerful. It doesn't just change opinions moving forward, it rewrites how people interpret the past. And this is exactly what 50 Cent has been hinting at. He isn't claiming to control the outcome. He's acknowledging inevitability. When documentation replaces speculation, the story stops being about belief and starts being about acceptance. As Season 2 approaches, the tone of media coverage has already shifted. Articles are more cautious. Language is more direct. There's less hedging. That's not coincidence. Media outlets adjust when they sense a narrative hardening, and that hardening has already begun. What's coming next doesn't rely on shock value. It relies on clarity, on connections, on showing viewers that what once felt like scattered controversy was actually something far more consistent. And consistency is what changes everything. For Diddy, the most damaging aspect may not be any single claim, but the cumulative weight, the realization that the story doesn't reset after each headline. It builds, it stacks. And season 2 reportedly stacks everything in a way that can't be ignored. This is also where audience responsibility comes into play. Viewers are no longer passive consumers. They question, they research, they compare narratives. Netflix understands that, and season 2 is reportedly structured to withstand that level of scrutiny. 50 Cent's confirmation didn't reveal details for a reason. He didn't need to. His confidence alone signals that the material speaks for itself. And when someone with his history stops joking and starts sounding certain, it's worth paying attention. As we move toward the final phase of this story, one thing becomes clear. Season 2 doesn't exist to entertain. It exists to finalize perception, to replace debate with documentation, and once that happens, control over the narrative disappears entirely. This isn't about predicting outcomes. It's about understanding direction, and the direction is clear. Because when stories reach this point, they don't fade out. They land. By the time season 2 arrives, the conversation around Diddy is no longer about whether something happened. It's about how long it was allowed to continue. That distinction is critical because it marks the exact moment when a public figure loses control of their narrative. And once that control is gone, no amount of statements, lawyers, or media strategy can fully restore it. When people say Netflix is finishing Diddy, they're not talking about a single episode or a dramatic reveal. They're talking about the collapse of a version of reality that protected him for decades. Reputation doesn't disappear overnight. It erodes. And season 2 appears designed to accelerate that erosion by connecting everything that was once kept separate. This is why the timing matters more than the content itself. Years ago, similar stories might have been dismissed as jealousy, industry beef, or isolated drama. Today, audiences don't view patterns the same way. Repetition no longer feels coincidental. Silence no longer feels neutral. And power no longer guarantees immunity. What makes season 2 a turning point is not outrage, but clarity. Instead of leaving viewers to fill in gaps, it reportedly lays out sequences. Who knew what when they knew it, and how long certain behaviors were ignored or normalized. Once those sequences are visible, denial becomes irrelevant. You don't argue with structure, you respond to it. This is also where 50 Cent's confirmation becomes fully understandable. He isn't predicting chaos. He's recognizing the end of ambiguity. He knows that once public perception solidifies, it doesn't need constant reinforcement. It sustains itself. And that's what makes season 2 dangerous in a way season 1 never was. Another uncomfortable truth is that the fallout won't stop with Diddy. When long-running narratives collapse, they expose the systems around them. Managers, executives, collaborators, not necessarily as perpetrators, but as participants in silence. Season 2 reportedly doesn't accuse everyone, but it does remove the illusion that no one noticed. That's where the real discomfort lies, because it forces the question many people avoided asking. If this was an open secret, why did it take so long to confront it publicly? The answer isn't simple, but it's consistent across industries. Power delays accountability. Not forever, just long enough to feel permanent. Netflix releasing a second season under this level of scrutiny signals that the delay phase is over. They aren't chasing controversy. They're responding to a cultural shift where avoidance is now riskier than exposure. And that calculation alone tells you how serious this moment is. For Diddy, the most damaging outcome may not be legal, but historical. History doesn't require verdicts. It requires consensus. Once consensus forms that a narrative was false or incomplete, legacy collapses quietly but permanently. Awards, influence, and cultural credit lose their meaning when the foundation beneath them erodes. Season 2 reportedly accelerates that process by reframing success itself, and this is a critical shift that many people underestimate. Instead of highlighting achievements in isolation, the documentary places them side by side with unresolved questions, unanswered timelines, and moments that were previously ignored or explained away. When success is no longer presented as a standalone story, it changes how the audience processes everything that came before it. awards, influence, and cultural moments don't disappear, but they become complicated, and once success is complicated, it can never be viewed the same way again. That juxtaposition quietly alters public memory, and memory once altered doesn't reset just because time passes or statements are released. This is why recovery becomes nearly impossible at this stage. Even if no new revelations were to emerge after season 2, the perception shift alone would continue to exist. It would live in how stories are framed, how interviews are conducted, and how history is recalled. Every future mention of Diddy would automatically carry context, not accusations shouted out loud, but questions silently implied. Every defense would sound outdated because it would be responding to an earlier version of the narrative. And every attempt to move forward would feel premature, not because people demand punishment, but because clarity has replaced uncertainty. That's what people truly mean when they say this is the finishing phase. They aren't talking about dramatic endings or public explosions. They're describing a settling, a moment where the public stops waiting for clarification, stops asking for more information, and starts accepting conclusions based on what's already visible. The conversation shifts from what if to this explains a lot. And once that shift happens, momentum no longer needs to be pushed. It sustains itself. It's also important to say this clearly because context matters. This story is not about celebrating anyone's downfall. It's not about cheering, mocking, or exaggerating consequences. It's about acknowledging how long certain narratives survive when power shields them. History is filled with examples of influential figures whose stories remained untouched for decades, not because questions didn't exist, but because challenging them carried risk. Season 2 matters because it challenges that shield directly, not with emotion, not with spectacle, but with documentation. And documentation changes the rules entirely. 50 Cent understood this long before it became popular or safe to say so. For years, his comments were framed as personal attacks or industry beef, but his confirmation now doesn't carry victory lap energy. It carries inevitability. He understands how these stories end, not because he controls them, but because he's seen the pattern repeatedly. They don't end with dramatic apologies. They don't end with satisfying closure. They end with distance, with people quietly stepping away, with invitations stopping, with silence replacing defense. That silence is not empty, it's loaded, and viewers are beginning to recognize it for what it is. As viewers, the responsibility now is discernment, not blind belief and not instant dismissal. It's about paying attention to how information is presented, how timelines align, and how responses shift when pressure increases. Season 2 doesn't ask the audience to be outraged. It doesn't demand emotional reactions. It demands attention. It asks viewers to notice patterns, to listen carefully, and to consider why certain stories were delayed for so long. And that's why this moment feels fundamentally different from every headline that came before it. Headlines are designed to spike interest and then disappear. They flare up and fade out. Structures don't. Structures remain. Once a structured narrative is built and accepted, it becomes the reference point for everything that follows. And that's the difference between controversy and recalibration. Netflix didn't build season 2 to shock viewers. Shock fades quickly. They built it to settle a question that has been hovering for years. Was this story ever complete? And based on everything we're seeing, the timing, the silence, the confidence behind the release, the answer appears to be no. Season 1 opened the door. Season 2 walks through it. This doesn't mean every mystery is solved or that every question has a clear answer. It means the direction is locked. The narrative no longer floats between interpretations. It lands. And once it lands, people stop debating its existence and start debating its implications. So when people say Diddy can't come back from this, they're not predicting prison, exile, or dramatic endings. They're recognizing something much quieter and far more permanent: the loss of the benefit of the doubt. Once that benefit is gone, nothing functions the same way again. Public reactions change, media tone shifts, and even silence takes on meaning. This is where the story stands now, not finished in the sense of closure, but finished in the sense of exposure. The phase where silence worked is over. The phase where documentation speaks has begun, and documentation doesn't argue, it accumulates. As more details continue to emerge, one thing is certain. This isn't a temporary moment. It isn't a cycle that resets after public attention moves elsewhere. It's a recalibration of how this story will be remembered going forward, and recalibrations don't reverse. Before you go, I want to hear from you. After everything we've broken down, do you believe season 2 will permanently change how Diddy is viewed? Or do you think the industry will eventually try to move on like nothing happened? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. And if you want to stay informed as this story continues to unfold, make sure you subscribe to the channel, because details matter now more than ever, and this story is far from over.